So first of all, let me thank Nimbaros for inviting me and having a possibility to give a talk here. I enjoyed the stay here, and my morning sessions were very exciting, and I hope tomorrow will be the same. So my talk stems from my recent work on Allee effects and the application or the hypothesis to use them for pest control. This is a larva of gypsy moth, very well-known pest here in the United States, and part of my work will be devoted also to possibilities of how to control this species. Okay, here's the outline of my talk. So first of all, for those, is there anybody here who have never heard about Allee effects? Okay, so I will just very quickly summarize some terminology behind Allee effects. Then I spent a minute on current work or recent work on Allee effects. And then I will move to the central part of my talk, which is Allee effects and pest control. And finally, I would like to say something about the hallmark of the strong demographic Allee effects, which is Allee threshold, and some problems which we may face when trying to fight them or trying to use them. So what are Allee effects? Allee effects occur when individual fitness decreases as the population size declines. So essentially, it's a opposite mechanism to competition, to intraspecific competition, where on the other hand, individual fitness increases as population size declines because individuals have more resources to use, and then they live better than when there are more of them. These Allee effects are named after the waterclide Allee, which was a behavioral ecologist at the University of Chicago, and who was one of the first persons who was interested in formation and persistence of animal aggregations. This definition of positive density dependence or positive dependence on fitness, on population size or density, is quite broad. And about 15 years ago, Phil Stevens and other persons decided to make a more precise definition of Allee effects, realizing that fitness is essentially an aggregate term or aggregate variable that comprises many components, and that when fitness is low in all or many population members, then the population may not fare very well and may go extinct. So that what they did is just to define component Allee effects and so-called demographic Allee effects. The component Allee effects denote any positive relationship between population size and density and any measurable component of fitness. So you may imagine, for example, the number of offspring. You can imagine adult survivorship, whatever, probability of surviving winter, probability of finding a mate. So these are all components of fitness, and if these components are positively density dependent, then we speak of component Allee effects. Demographic Allee effects occur when this relationship occurs on the level of total population, total fitness of individuals. So that when we put together all the fitness components, we still get the positive density dependence at low population densities or small population sizes, then we speak of demographic Allee effects. And the important thing which is commonly used is that the demographic Allee effect is quantified, or the total fitness of the population is, at least in theoretical ecology, is quantified through per capita population growth rate. So that if we speak of demographic Allee effects, we essentially speak of positive dependence between population size or density and per capita population growth rate. On the other side. Of course, when we speak of component Allee effects, we have to have in mind mechanisms that are behind. There are many. At the moment, there are 15 to 20 mechanisms revealed for component Allee effects. These are just 5 of them, and the two most common are mate finding and predator dilution. Main finding occurs when in rare populations you have troubles to find your partner to mate, and therefore your reproductive rate decreases with decreasing population size. Predator dilution as a mechanism for Allee effect occurs when the population gets smaller, you as an individual have better chance to be eaten, so that you have a lower probability to escape essentially predation. Not all function responses lead to predator dilution, but the most common functional response, type 2 functional response, is an example of the predator functional response that leads to this kind of component Allee effect. No. Okay. So this is one of the earliest examples of component Allee effects, which was revealed by Allee himself, is the reproductive rate in bark beetles Tribulum confusum. We see here the population density and reproductive rate, which is initially increasing and then decreasing. So that this part is a result of competitive interactions, in particular cannibalism in this species, and this part is a result of the of one component Allee effect, which is related to main finding, because beetles need to find certain density of conspecifics to come into the condition of reproduction. When we speak of demographic Allee effects, we distinguish between weak and strong demographic Allee effects. As I said, the Allee effect, demographic Allee effect, is the positive density dependence between population density and per capita population growth rate, and we can have this positive dependence declining to some positive number, or we can have it declining to some negative number and crossing the x-axis. And when we have just this dependence, we speak of big Allee effects, because the population grows for any population density. The only feature here is that the growth is limited in low density populations. But when we speak of strong Allee effects, we have population growth rate decreasing below some critical value, which we call the Allee threshold. And the Allee threshold will play a considerable role in further part of the talk. Unfortunately, even though component Allee effects are very well demonstrated and there is a lot of evidence for them, for demographic Allee effects, the evidence is very scarce. This is because of many statistical problems, of many data collection problems, and also because of evolution, because it is generally thought that because of Allee effects are related to individual fitness, that evolution will work to mitigate or completely avoid the Allee effects, so that we would expect that demographic Allee effects are not that common. But even if they are common, if they exist, we have the problems in data detection because of these various problems in fitting curves to low-density population data. But the Brasheres et al. Were lucky to find this demographic Allee effect in Vancouver Island marmots. So we see here the population size and per capita population growth rate, which is decreasing when the population size goes down, and even they are crossing zero at some point. So that we have an example of a strong demographic Allee effect. This picture then suggests the mechanism which is behind this demographic Allee effect. These are home ranges of different species of marmots. This one is the marmot which was explored, and this is the home range of former populations, and this is the home range of the current populations of this Vancouver Island marmot. So that the current populations, which are declining, have very large home range, which causes the problems in finding mates, which causes the problems with finding food, because they need to invest more time in looking for predators and hiding from predation. so that the mechanism behind this demographic Allee effect seems to be related to decrease in all these activities that increase reproduction rate or decrease the mortality rate. Okay, so this was all about the Allee effects, definition, concepts. Now a minute on work on Allee effects. So this is the number of papers in the past since 1974 to 2013, which in title, abstract, or keywords contain this was Allee effects, positive density dependence, positively density dependent independization, and you see some kind of linear increase in the number of papers. What's interesting is that during the last 5 years, there was published the same number of papers than in the whole history of ecology, say. So that whoever wants to switch topic now has the greatest chance. It's the right time because you can catch the wave and make some good CV out of the published papers.
There seems to be a crash in 2013.
You're right. But if you multiply it by 12, or now 6 times, so it's 15, well, you'll see. But yeah, extrapolation. Interesting thing from the point of view of the number of papers is the number of citations. So the citations, you see that the papers grow more or less linearly, but the citations grow more or less exponentially, which might suggest that the Allee effects find a way also to people who were skeptical before or who just do not publish themselves the articles which are related to Allee effects. But maybe it's just my suggestion. So these are the milestones in the study of Allee effects, but I think it's not that important to explain there now. This is also interesting graph because this is within the previous papers. It's the subsearch which contains the word population model, so that essentially we can take it as a first approximation of how many papers were theoretical and how many papers were empirical, and up to some 2004, 2005, you can comparing these numbers and the previous numbers. You need to believe me. You can find that there were much more theoretical papers than empirical papers. So that, and this caused at the time, this caused some like skepticism of empiricists, which were just saying, okay, this is like a theoretical concept. This is like something like amusement of theoretical biologists. So we don't really need to spend time on it. But in the last 8 to 10 years, the number of papers which are theoretical and empirical is roughly 50 to 50. So that there is increasing empirical research on Allee effects, and even within this last 8 to 10 years, we have much more evidence, at least for the component Allee effects, but also some more demographic Allee effects were detected. Now to the main topic of the research. So I am starting with some quotes from the paper by Daniel Simberloff, which somehow justify what we do, because our main assumption is that the demographic Allee effects exist, and we try to explain them. So that I'm using these quotes to justify that, because what Daniel Simberloff said, that we should consider the full range of possible methods for eradication or long-term control, even if these methods just are now on the paper. But if they are suggestive for another further research, then we should consider them seriously. And the other quote is that larger species must be studied well enough to suggest vulnerabilities. So that if we find at least the component Allee effect in a species, and better if we find a demographic Allee effect in the species, we should definitely consider it as one of the vulnerabilities which we could exploit in pest control. I will not speak about traditional pest control, which is essentially an attempt to decrease the population size or density to some tolerable levels, which are below something like an economic threshold or economic cost threshold. But I will speak preliminarily mainly about eradication of small or sparse invading populations. So that we have a population which is invading, which successfully crossed the border, which avoided any measures on the ports, for example, and started to establish in a wild, in a non-native environment. It is still small or sparse, and we have detected it already, and we have a chance to eradicate it as early as possible, and we would like to use some means to do that. Even though eradication as such is questioned quite a lot of times, because the main objection is, okay, we cannot kill any individual because we cannot find any individual, or we cannot sample the population to prove that it is eradicated or not, because if 1 or 2 individuals remain, the costs to find them would be extreme. So even though there are these complaints, there are many successful examples of eradication. Many such examples go from gypsy moth eradications in West Coast, because the East Coast is in East Coast or northeastern US. The gypsy moth is almost everywhere, so that it's very hard to control it there, at least, or very hard to eradicate it there, if impossible. But on the West Coast, there are very small seeds of gypsy moth establishment and spread, because they are moved there by transportation, by goods, by cars from the East Coast, and all these small establishments were successfully eradicated. There's also a lot of successful eradications all over the world regarding the fruit flies, so that at least eradication, we know that eradication is possible. And even if that might not be the case all the time, key to the success of eradication might lie in strong demographic Allee effects. Why? There are 2 possible ways how to exploit these demographic Allee effects, so that such Allee effects that have some Allee threshold, some critical value below which the population growth rate is negative, or is below 1 in case of discrete time framework. And one way, which probably is very intuitive, is, okay, just take the population which is here and cull it below the level of the Allee threshold. And Mother Nature does the rest. The problem with this situation is that evolution, as I said before, evolution probably tends to decrease this value as much as possible, so that culling this population to very low levels is almost comparable, not really, but almost comparable to culling any individual in population. So it might be very costly. So the other strategy is to take the current Allee threshold and somehow increase it to much higher levels, so that the current population is below this new value of the Allee threshold. So how to do that? The idea behind these 2 strategies is not new, and the idea behind this more say promising strategy comes at least to 1980s, at which time Berkeley started to model consequences of sterile insect release control, and he found that even in populations which have no inherent Allee effect, this method itself, the release of sterile males itself, can create an Allee effect in the population, in the sense that the model predicts that there is an unstable population equilibrium which divides the steady state into 2 parts, one which attracts the equilibrium with positive population density, and one which attracts all trajectories to extinction. For some reason, they didn't relate their work to Allee effect, in the sense that in none of his paper the word Allee effect or the phrase Allee effect appears, but it's one of the first works which shows the at least theoretical possibility to exploit the Allee effect in practical control. And the truth is that the stale insect release method was successfully used to eradicate many populations over the world, so that it's likely that at least in some of these populations the Allee effect helped to eradicate these populations. Because this work was published in some not very influential journal, it was buried for some time, at least for the community which is not specialized to SIT. And it took about 20 years for the people to realize that exploitation of Allee effects is not just a fairy tale and it's possible. And this happened with the publication of the paper by Liebhold and Bascombe in Ecology Letters in 2003, where they used the model to show that to eradicate some local populations of gypsy moth, it's not necessary to kill any individual in the population, but it's sufficient to lower the population size below some critical value. So now, how we can do that practically? So how can we exploit the Allee effect to eradicate the population? So let's start with a very simple modeling example. So let's have a discrete time model of a population with non-overlapping generations, which has a main finding Allee effect and no competitive interactions. So there are no density dependence in large densities, because we are primarily interested in small populations just after they established after the invasion. So let's have this model, which without this term is standard geometric growth, and this term is one of the formalizations of the main finding Allee effect. So if we take this model and analyze it for equilibria, we find that there is an Allee threshold in the population, and all the populations which start below A go extinct, whereas all the populations which start above A persist and growth. So we have this like a baseline situation, and we would like now to I forgot all the time to use this. So we would like to exploit this. Yeah, so our aim is to use some control tactic to eradicate this population. So for simplicity, we use a very simple control tactic, which is application of pesticides in a way that pesticides are sprayed over the area, and we assume that the pesticides kill a fraction of the population. So let P be a fraction of the population which is killed by using the pesticides. If we apply it just once in 1 year, then to eradicate the population, what we need is just to force the population to be below the Allee threshold in the next year or in the next time step. So that this term, which is essentially the growth of the population over 1 year, where all these population sizes are multiplied by 1 minus P to reflect this control, so that this is population size in the next time step, and this needs to be less than A. So we can then, simple analysis then shows that we at least need to have P larger than some critical value to cause the population to fall below the Allee threshold, and then to make them or to put them in the state of extinction vertex, and it then goes extinct by themselves. Forgot about stochasticity at the moment. This is the example of the situation where we lower the population size because we do not affect the Allee effect in any, the Allee threshold in any way. We just apply once the pesticides and just look at how much we should use to make the population extinct, or make the population falling below A. What we get if we apply the permanent pesticides application, so that we applied pesticides every year, then the application itself becomes part of the life cycle. So that we modify the dynamic model and we get the following equation, so that everything now, every population size is multiplied by y minus b. And we can also here solve for the Allee threshold, finding that the value of the Allee threshold now depends on p. And you can see quite easily that as p increases, so that as more effective the control is, the pesticide effect is, then the Allee threshold increases. So the AC of p increases, so that we have here the second kind of control. We essentially do not affect the population. Well, we do affect the population, but at the same time we increase the Allee threshold. So that to eradicate the density, we now need not to compare the next population size to A, but to this ACP. So that we have now inequality which on both sides has P, and we can solve it for the proper value of P. If we apply data for Gypsymov, lambda equal to 15 and theta equal to 105, we get these two curves for minimum control effort in the case of single application of pesticides and permanent application of pesticides. So we see that as you would expect, the minimum control effort decreases with the permanent application of the pesticides. So we have here two trajectories. The blue one is for population density of 100, current population density at the beginning, so that the blue curve is uses P above the blue curve here, and the red curve uses P below the red curve here. So we see that the red curve uses the P below the blue curve here, so that we have two P's above and below the blue curve, and we see that above the population goes extinct, and below the blue curve the population grows in geometric sense. Of course, you need not to use the permanent application forever. That would be useless. But if there is an inherent Allee effect in the population, it's your friend, because once the population gets below it, you can stop controlling, and again you have the nature does the rest. Also, the other possibility is that you can reduce the control effort as the time proceeds, because here, if you are at this point, the population size is something like a 70, so that you can go here, find a 70 as a critical value, so the critical value is lower, so that you can decrease your control effort and you can save some money and get to some more efficient control of the population. So this is nice, but the question is, what can you do if there is no inherent Allee effect in the population? Because you can say, okay, there are populations which have no inherent Allee effect. So that if they have no inherent effect, whatever you can do with the pest control is just to come to this equation, and you still have, unless this value is less than 1, you still have exponential growth or geometric growth. So one possibility is to use some inverse density dependent culling, in the sense that your efficiency of culling increases as the population size decreases. And then applying, for example, this function to this equation, you get new population dynamics which is essentially the same like if it was an inherent Allee effect. So that you essentially create an Allee effect and you create the Allee threshold just by applying the proper type of population control.
But is it reasonable?
No problem.
Like it's harder, I guess, to call when there are fewer. You're saying it's clear faster, and if it's a smaller population, maybe they're dispersed, it's much harder to.
You still suppose that they are within the area, so that if you spray the area with a and you can contain the population and spray the area with larger efficiency, so that your your pesticide is more and more effective every year, then and assume that the pesticide can fall down on the bugs that you don't see. Then the problem with this is different, and problem is this: when you don't have an inherent Allee effect, you cannot stop the population control, because if you stop it, then immediately you go back to this equation and the population grows. So that then you need to either rely on demographic stochasticity or another kind of stochasticity to control the rest of the population, or you can apply it only for populations which have inherent Allee effect. So that, but still, you can combine both. You can have both inherent Allee effect and use this inverse density dependent control. Then you have something like a double Allee effect, because you have two positive density dependence relationship in your model, and you get something which is more complicated, at least when we write it. But it's as you expect, it's much more effective, because when you combine two positive density dependence mechanisms, then you get something stronger than each of them. So that the question is now whether it is effective to combine these two. So whether it is more effective to use this kind of control if there is already some inherent Allee effect, or whether it's sufficient just to use here time-independent kind of control. So to answer this question, we need to consider how the two Allee effects interact in the population. And there are essentially four interesting ways of how the Allee effects, how two-component Allee effects interact. Here, the red curve is for for the population with one of the Allee effects. It's just a sketch. The second one is the blue one is for the population with another Allee effect, and the red one is for the population with both Allee effects in the working in it. So you can recognize four cases here. The first one is that a combination of two Allee effects causes the final Allee effect, the combined Allee effect, to be much stronger than any of the individual Allee effects. I call it super additivity here. The other situation is that you have a weak Allee effect here, so there's no Allee threshold for the green line. You have some strong Allee effect for the other mechanism, and you have much stronger Allee effect for the combination. So that even a weak Allee effect contributes much to the result. Here you have a double dormant Allee effect. I call this dormant Allee effect. Okay, so for double dormancy, both of the individual Allee effects are only weak, but still the combination is very strong. This is a good result, because there are some indications of that most of the demographic Allee effects in nature, if they exist, are weak, so that even weak Allee effects can be strong enough when combined. And the final situation, which I call subadditivity, is such that one of the Allee effects doesn't contribute much to the resulting Allee threshold, so that these two Allee thresholds are almost the same regardless of this mechanism, so that adding this mechanism doesn't bring anything important into the population dynamics. So these are four possibilities of how to distinguish weak and strong interaction of two Allee effects. And these interactions have important consequences for many kinds of applied biology. One of such consequences is that we should try to find all Allee effects which are present in the population. Why? Because if we do not realize that there is one in the population, then the Allee threshold which we calculate can be much lower than the actual Allee threshold which is in the population. So that we can miss important part of the problem, and we can then manage the population to the value or to the state which is insufficient. For example, if we have a population which is controlled, some pest population. So if we just recognize one Allee effect, so that we have one Allee threshold which is low, relatively low, then we can invest much more money to eradicate the population, because we do not recognize the other one. So that if we recognize both, then the Allee threshold becomes, for example, very large, and we can invest much less to eradicate the population. Another possibility is in conservation biology. So if we miss one of the Allee thresholds, one of the Allee effects, our resulting Allee threshold can be small, and we can be satisfied with the population having enough individuals which are just above this Allee threshold. But the real Allee threshold can be much larger because of an interaction with the unrecognized Allee effect. So essentially, we miscontrol the population, and the conservation measures can be inadequate. And a similar situation appears in the exploitation, because if we just also recognize only one of the Allee effects, and we can exploit the population to the state just above the recognized Allee threshold. But if it is much larger, then we can overexploit the population and make it extinct, even if we don't know it. Okay. So these are just qualitative results from the interaction, and they do not say anything about how to exploit this combination for pest control. Because if we are to optimize our if we would like to optimize or find the best amount of money we should use for control the population, we should take also this economic information into account. So if we know, if we recognize all the Allee effects in the population, we can plot a graph like this with these ethoc lines showing different Allee values of Allee threshold. And then if we are able to quantify our costs, we can just put here the ethoc lines relating to the same cost for different combinations of these two control measures, and find the optimum, which either here or here, which leads to the maximum value of the Allee threshold we can get for our money. So we can predict when, for example, will be more practical to use only one of the control measures, or when will be practical to use both control measures in some combination. To be specific, I show some modeling which we recently published with Julie Blackwood and other people, which concerns the eradication effort of gypsy moth in this west coast, where the populations are so small, and we consider three control tactics: pesticide application, predator augmentation, and mating disruption. So our model looks like this. We have we are modeling the life cycle of the gypsy moth and describe the larval stage. So this JT is the number of larvae in period T, in time period T, and of these larvae, only some proportion survives to pupal stage because we have some natural mortality M and some efficiency of applying pesticides P. Then we have a pupal survival modeled by the function W, where C is the number of predators which predate on this pupae, which we can control. And finally, we have a reproduction, so that the pupae close, and we have a function which describes the mating between males and females, and the result is number of mated females during the season. Here, P quantifies the number or some density of pheromones released into the environment, which causes mating disruption. And finally, we go to the next generation of larvae by multiplying the number of mated females by the size of the clutch of eggs per female. So here is the model for predation. It's a type of function response which operates for 11 days, which is capital T here, so that in each day, the time step is 1 day here, so that in each day there is a proportion of pupae which will be consumed by predators, and at the end we just have the number of pupae which enter the eclosion state. Here we have a model for mating season dynamics conceptually, so that 1-to-1 sex ratio, eclosion times are based on normal distribution with some means and variances, and there is a protandry in the system, so that the males appear before the females. So this important thing is how large is the overlap between these two. And we distinguish 5 states: virgin females, fertile males searching for females, fertile males resting after mating, fertile males that are caught in following pheromone sources, and finally couples of males and females. So this is the system. I will not go into details, but for each class we have one equation. This equation contains here the term for eclosion, virgin females, males. Here are the terms for mating. Here's the mating between virgin females and males. Here should be minus, I'm sorry. Here is the interaction between pheromones and searching males. So it's like that. You can imagine like that male mates with a pheromone trap and gets stuck for some time before he recognizes that this is not a female and starts to search again. And the rest essentially are some transition terms from one class to another class. The Q is the equation for couples, so that TQ is the time spent in a couple, so that 1 over TQ times Q is the rate at which mated females decouple and enter the egg-laying state, so that then the number of mated females essentially is an integral of this expression for all the reproductive period, which is like tau is the length of the mating season period. And of course, the important part of the model is quantifying costs. So again, I will not go into details, but we were able to quantify costs for all the 3 assumed control measures. And if we now go into simulations, we assume that the Allee threshold is defined as a critical number of egg masses per hectare. Without any control measure, there is an Allee threshold 1.24 egg masses per hectare, so that we consider alien population extinct when it falls below this value, and would like to find the lowest strategy with the lowest cost, which combines any 2 of these 3 control tactics. So when we combine pesticide application and predator augmentation, we have this graph for the Allee threshold, so that here different colors mean the different size of the Allee threshold. So of course, the more we apply pheromones, pesticides, and the more predators we release, the higher we have the Allee threshold. But these isoclines of costs of applying these two tactics show that essentially the release of predators is very costly control method. But anyway, for most of the annual costs, the best value we can do, the best thing we can do is to use as much pesticides as possible and also to release the predators, as much predators as we can for the given budget. Here we have the number of years before extinction. So that for these combinations, we are able to eradicate population in 2 years, but here we are not able to eradicate the population in any time. And finally, we have a total cost of eradication, which is this cost times this number of years. So that number of years to eradication times annual costs. And we find then here the optimum value of our effort, which in this case is to spray the population of gypsy moth with a pesticide which has 85% efficiency. Then we get the most efficient control of all these controls which we study here. If we combine the mating disruption and predator augmentation, we get very similar graphs. So again, it's not that efficient to use predators because the isolines are almost horizontal here, the cost isolines, and the optimal value of our control method is to release only pheromones and release something like 75,000 force pheromones point sources per hectare. So these are like pheromone flakes spread from the airplane. So this value is just you can see it like a approximate value, which for our parameters gives the most efficient control for this combination of tactics. What's interesting here is that this part of the space is very large. So that this part says for any combination of this, the population will be extinct in 2 years. And the optimal strategy says use only pheromones. So the spray only from the airplane. But there is a lot of movement that says, okay, we are against any spraying. We would like to use some different control method. But this is possible here because we have here the large space, or even if we consider 3 years to eradication, we have a large space here for very efficient population control. So that if we are able to accumulate a lot of resources, we can go from here, for example here, and get much less use of pheromones, and we can compensate for this by using predators, increasing the predator density, which is probably less, not that difficult to accept by these people. And finally, we have interaction of pesticides and mating disruption. Now the graph looks completely differently because the isolines are not anymore horizontal lines, but are more or less slanted lines, which are slightly concave here. And it turns out that the optimal control here is just to use only pheromones, no pesticides, which might be a good message because you need not to use pesticides. But if you want, but this corresponds to 3 years time of eradication. If we would like to use 2 years or optimize for 2 years of eradication, then the best value is to use combination of these two tactics. So only in this case, and under the constraint that I would like to kill a population in 2 years, then we get something like an optimality that corresponds to the combined effect of both tactics. And the final part of the work is related to the complexities which surround the estimation of Allee threshold, or stuff around behind Allee threshold. when we include stochasticity in our modeling, the situation becomes slightly more complicated, because there is no more anything like a fixed value of critical population size above which population goes to some high values and below which it goes extinct, but it's whole range of population densities here where you can, with some probability, get extinction, and with some probability you get persistence. So that then it depends on the luck partially where you end up, whether you end up with extinction or you end up with persistence. So that the Allee threshold now corresponds to inflection point of this curve, but for your predictions of applicability of any control measure, you need to count with all these probability of extinction. So that's one of the complexities. And indeed, doesn't work. Get stuck. Oh no. Yeah. So here you can see some time series that you start here just above the Allee threshold, and you get extinction. Here you start just below the Allee threshold, and you can get persistence. So here are just then quasi stationary distribution when the population persists, and here we have extinction. So of course extinction occurs much more frequently in this case, and persistence much more frequently in this case, but still you can get both outputs depending on the luck. The other thing which is related to the Allee threshold is that essentially when you get data in a model, well, the one of the methods of how to estimate the Allee threshold is you compose a population model, you perform some behavioral experiment in which you estimate the strength of the component Allee effect, like the main finding Allee effect, and then you put this value into your population model and estimate the Allee threshold from the dynamics of your model. But the problem that you have is that if you estimate this component Allee effect, your result will not be some one number, but will be just like distribution or something like you will have a number plus uncertainty in this number. And the question is whether this uncertainty affects the probability of population extinction in an important way, or it doesn't matter to consider this uncertainty. So to be more specific, we assume that the population is driven by this equation. So again, we have no density dependence at large densities, but if we have made finding Allee effect in it, this is just a different formalization of main finding Allee effect, so that this term corresponds to the situation that the lower is n, the lower is this value, so that the b, the reproduction term, becomes very low when the population is very low, and the Allee threshold derived from this value from this equation is just this one. And now we have the experiment, main finding experiment. So what we would like is to estimate theta here and use this equation to estimate the Allee threshold. So this is what people usually do. And our question in this paper was, if this estimation of this parameter has some uncertainty behind, how it projects to the uncertainty behind this value of A. So to estimate the value of theta, we assume some main finding experiment that we have at disposal, or some other people performed it. So that we imagine that we have some replicates of the experiment, in each of which we put together some number of males and number of females in some arena, and observe that just some part of the females get mated at the end of the experiment. So we have a vector of data, like population sizes in the arena and numbers of mated females in each of these experimental replicates. then we can then we assumed that the parameter theta needs to be estimated, and we assume we use the Bayesian way of estimating it, so we assume that the theta is kind of random variable, and so we were able to, given some prior probability density of this parameter, we were able to calculate the posterior probability density based on the data we have. This is simple because the use of Bayesian rule says that this is this value where the L is the likelihood of estimating theta given the data. And this likelihood, because of this experiment, is binomial in the sense that the female gets mated or not. We need to use the product binomial likelihood for all of these replicates. So this is the likelihood for theta given data D. And now, given this posterior probability density, we need to estimate probability of extinction given population size capital N. And after some derivation, you can show that this integral is just the estimate of the probability of extinction, so that essentially what we need is to evaluate this fraction, where the constant m is given by this formula, and what we give is this result. So again, for gypsy mode, we get the posterior probability density on theta is just some Gaussian form or some Bell form, and if we put it into the integral on the previous slide, we get this curve for the probability of population extinction. So that even for deterministic model, the accounting for uncertainty in the data or in the estimation of the strength of main Van effect results in the sigmoidal decreasing curve of probability of population extinction that looks almost like the probability caused by stochasticity. So one would say that this is the same mechanism behind, but it's not true, because one needs to distinguish the mechanisms behind these two graphs. So here, if we consider uncertainty, the population model is deterministic, so that still the Allee threshold is some fixed value, but we cannot estimate it precisely, so that this curve only expresses our belief into the value of this threshold, so that we know that here the probability of extinction is 1, here is 0, but here in the transition zone, as we are not certain where the Allee threshold lies, that we get some non-zero, non-unit probability of extinction. But here in stochasticity, in the case of stochasticity, there is no Allee threshold, and the population can survive or get extinct randomly in this transition zone. So there are two conceptual differences between these two things. But still, yeah, okay. And when we used these results for different parameter values, so that we have here reproductive rate B of the population, and we have here the strength of the Allee effect, the true strength, which was estimated in the main finding experiment, in our virtual experiment, then we get, and we quantified for each of this combination of two values, we quantified this inflection point of this curve and the slope of this curve, because what the slope of this curve, the larger is the slope, like this, it says that the uncertainty has a larger effect. So if the slope is very steep, then we can forget about the uncertainty and use the point estimate. If the slope is very large, then we need to account for the uncertainty in the estimate. So we would like what we were doing is just estimating or calculating the value of the inflection point and the slope at this inflection point for different values of B and theta. Here, what we have here is quite expected. The inflection point gets larger, the larger is theta, and the lower is B, because then the Allee effect gets stronger. But the slope here also gets larger the lower is b and the higher is theta. So that the more dangerous is the situation, so that the less recovery potential the population has, so that b is low, and the larger is the Allee effect, the stronger is the Allee effect, then we get our slope at the inflection point, we get very large. So that the message from this is that the impact of the Allee effect increases, the impact of uncertainty in estimating the Allee effect increases with the lower b and higher theta. And this is not the good news, because these populations in this part are most vulnerable to extinction because their recovery potential is low and their Allee threshold is potentially very large. And these are exactly the populations we would like to control most efficiently. But for these populations, we have the largest uncertainty in our estimate. So that we are now in troubles, and we would like to count with this in our strategies to control these populations. These are just the 4 species. I get data for the bean weevil, gypsy moth, the butterfly, mountain person, and the freshwater copperpot, so that we can see for these species how vulnerable they are to extinction if they get if their population gets small. So the most vulnerable is the freshwater copperpot. On the other hand, the least vulnerable is the Azuki bean weevil. Of course, you might now note that we should combine these two things. So we should combine stochasticity and we should combine this uncertainty in estimation, because we have both these processes working on, and if we try to control low density population, we should account for uncertainty. So we did that and asked the question whether large stochasticity can mask the effect of uncertainty. Whether if there is large stochasticity, we can forget about uncertainty and consider only stochasticity. So that we consider the stochastic model here, where Fn is the same like before, the deterministic part of the model, and we have a noise here. So we model demographic stochasticity by this noise. And if we assume that this value, px of population size and theta, is the probability of population extinction given the true value of theta, and we can estimate the probability of extinction given population size n when the theta is not just estimated. So we just have this integral or this fraction here to estimate the probability of population extinction given both uncertainty in the parameter estimation and both demographic stochasticity. And if we look at the results, we have here a couple of curves. So the black curve, here the dotted black curve corresponds to only uncertainty, and the dotted, and the full black curve corresponds to uncertainty plus stochasticity, both for low value of stochastic noise. Here the dark gray is the same for larger stochastic noise, and the light gray is for even larger stochastic noise for 3 different species. And we see here that when you go from small stochastic noise to large one, that these dashed curves and solid curves come together, and for large enough stochastic noise, they essentially overlap. So that the larger is the stochastic noise, the lower is the relative effect of uncertainty on the probability of population extinction. So if we are sure that the population is affected by large stochasticity, we can ignore the effect of uncertainty, and we get a reliable estimate of the probability of population extinction. Unfortunately, the largest value of stochastic noise, where you could start to ignore the effect of uncertainty, depends on the species or the other parameters of the model. So there is no fixed threshold for any parameter where you can ignore it. So always you need to find this critical value or estimate the stochasticity in the population and to see whether it is above or below the critical value. And finally, let me conclude by stressing the main important points I gave in this talk. The first message is that Allee effects, especially strong demographic Allee effects, can be our friends in an effort to eradicate the population. So that first of all, we should, if we are in the position of eradicate the population, and we don't know much about population dynamics, we don't know much about life history of the species, the first thing we should do is, together with estimation of parameters like mortality, birth rate, dispersal, and the other things, we should also look for Allee effects in the population. So because if we find them, we have a better chance to efficiently eradicate the population. Also, we need to find the primary mechanisms behind these Allee effects, if they are found, because as you saw, the actual control tactics operate on these mechanisms. So if we know that they are made finding Allee effect, we can use different sort of tactics to exploit this Allee effect. If we know there is a predation-driven Allee effect, we use completely different tactics to exploit this Allee effect. So that we also should know not only that there is Allee effect, but also the mechanism which causes it. That's also here, like most models. We then, once we have some knowledge of the life history of the species, we can develop population dynamic models and attack the population and find the most vulnerable part of the population by combining different control tactics and looking at which tactic is or which combination of tactics is the best one. I also demonstrated two ways of how to exploit the Allee effect. First one is just lower population density, and the second one is just to increase the Allee threshold, so that, as I already said twice, this just lowering population density need not be the most effective part, because the evolution can shape the Allee threshold such that it is very low. Alternatively, we can enhance the Allee effect, create an Allee effect, and possibly increase the Allee threshold to such a high level that we can exploit efficiently it for population control. Oh, sorry. And here is just a very, very rough way of how to do things in case of any particular species and in case of an eradication effort. So estimate everything about the species we need to, including the Allee effects, introduce feasible control tactics into the model, and identify potentially successful control tactics, so that the combination, the either single one-shot measures or some long-term programs, combination of tactics, single tactics, and choose tactics based on the available budget. Of course, this is valid also for species that do not have the Allee effect. And this last information is about the last part of the talk, when I showed that the Allee threshold, we have some problems in estimating the right value of Allee threshold, so that we need to have it in mind and shape our management such that this management is some kind of risk averse. So that if we know the Allee threshold is something like between 10 and 20, then we should count like, okay, it's better when I calculate, when I think it is 5, so that I am safe. I am not in this transition zone, and I am far below this transition zone. Okay. So that's all. Thank you very much.